AZ-204 Exam Prep, Azure Networking Interview Questions. 1. What is Azure Virtual Network, NET, and why is it important? Azure Virtual Network, NET, is the fundamental building block for private networks in Azure. It allows resources such as VMs to securely communicate with each other, the Internet, and on-premises networks. It is important because it provides isolation, segmentation, and secure communication. 2. What are network security groups, NSGs, in Azure? Network security groups, NSGs, are used to filter network traffic to and from Azure resources in an Azure Virtual Network. They contain security rules that allow or deny inbound or outbound traffic based on source/destination IP, port, and protocol. 3. What is the difference between Azure Load Balancer and Azure Application Gateway? Azure Load Balancer operates at Layer 4, transport layer, and is used for high availability and network traffic distribution based on IP and port. Azure Application Gateway operates at Layer 7, application layer, and supports features like URL-based routing, SSL termination, and Web Application Firewall, WAF. 4. How does Azure VPN Gateway work? Azure VPN Gateway connects on-premises networks to Azure through site-to-site, point-to-site, or net-to-net VPNs. It uses IPsec/IK for encrypted tunnel connections over the Internet. 5. What is Azure ExpressRoute? Azure ExpressRoute allows private connections between Azure data centers and on-premises infrastructure or colocation environments. It provides higher security, reliability, and lower latency than typical Internet connections. 6. What are UDRs, user-defined routes, in Azure and why are they used? User-defined routes, UDRs, are custom routes created to override Azure's default routing behavior. They are used for directing traffic to network virtual appliances, forcing Internet-bound traffic through firewalls, or managing hybrid connectivity. 7. What is Azure Private Endpoint? Azure Private Endpoint is a network interface that connects you privately and securely to a service powered by Azure Private Link. It ensures that traffic between your virtual network and the service traverses over the Microsoft backbone network instead of the public Internet. 8. How do you secure communication between nets? Communication between nets can be secured using net peering, with private IPs only, combined with NSGs and optionally Azure Firewall or network virtual appliances for advanced control and logging. 9. What is net peering? Net peering connects to Azure nets, enabling resources in both nets to communicate with each other through private IP addresses. It is low latency and does not require a VPN or gateway. 10. How does Azure DNS work? Azure DNS hosts your DNS domain in Azure and provides name resolution using Microsoft Azure infrastructure. You can manage your DNS records using the same credentials and billing as your other Azure services. 11. What is the purpose of an Azure Application Security Group, ASG? Azure Application Security Groups, ASGs, allow you to group virtual machines and define network security policies based on those groups. This simplifies management by using application-centric rules instead of IP addresses. 12. Can nets in different regions be connected? If so, how? Yes, nets in different regions can be connected using global net peering, which enables private, high-speed connectivity across Azure regions through Microsoft's backbone network. 13. What is Azure Bastion and when should you use it? Azure Bastion is a fully managed service that provides secure and seamless RDP and SSH access to your VMs directly from the Azure portal without exposing them to the public Internet. 14. What is the difference between public IP and private IP in Azure? Public IPs are used to communicate with Azure resources over the Internet, while private IPs are used for internal communication within a virtual network or between peered nets. 15. What is Azure Firewall? Azure Firewall is a managed, cloud-based network security service that protects Azure Virtual Network resources. It offers stateful packet inspection, high availability, and scalability. 16. How can you restrict outbound internet traffic in an Azure net? You can restrict outbound internet traffic using NSG rules, Azure Firewall, route tables to redirect traffic to a network virtual appliance, NVA, or by not assigning public IP addresses to resources. 17. What are service endpoints in Azure networking? Service endpoints allow you to extend your net's private address space to Azure services over the Azure backbone network, enhancing security by removing the need for public internet access. 18. What is the difference between service endpoints and private endpoints? Service endpoints allow private access to Azure services over the Azure backbone, but the resource still uses a public IP. Private endpoints assign a private IP to the Azure service in your net, completely isolating it from public internet access. 19. How do you monitor network traffic in Azure? You can monitor network traffic using Network Watcher, which provides tools like NSG flow logs, packet capture, connection troubleshoot, and topology view. 20. What is IP forwarding in Azure and when is it used? IP forwarding allows a VM or NVA to receive traffic not intended for its own IP address. It is commonly used when deploying virtual appliances like firewalls or routers in Azure. 21. What is a Network Interface Card, NIC, in Azure? An Azure Network Interface Card, NIC, connects a virtual machine to an Azure Virtual Network. It enables the VM to communicate with Internet, on-premises, or other Azure resources. 22. What is DNS forwarding in Azure and how is it used? DNS forwarding allows Azure to forward DNS queries from VMs to custom DNS servers, such as on-premises DNS, using Azure DNS forwarders or custom DNS settings in the net. 23. What is the use of Azure Route Table, UDR, priority? Azure uses the longest prefix match rule to determine the most specific route. There's no concept of priority numbers, but more specific routes override default or broader ones. 24. Can you have multiple NICs on a single Azure VM? Yes, certain VM sizes in Azure support multiple NICs, which can be used for network segregation, increased throughput, or custom routing scenarios. 25. What is the default routing behavior in Azure nets? By default, Azure automatically handles routing within the net and to the Internet, if allowed. It includes system routes for net, on-premises, and Internet traffic. 26. How does Azure ensure isolation between nets? Azure nets are isolated by default, meaning resources in one net cannot communicate with another unless explicitly connected through net peering or VPN. 27. How do you allow a VM to communicate with the Internet securely in Azure? Use Azure NAT Gateway for outbound-only access to the Internet, combine it with NSG rules, and avoid assigning public IPs unless necessary. 28. What happens if you delete a net in Azure? When a net is deleted, all associated subnets and network configurations are also deleted, and resources relying on the net will lose connectivity. 29. Can a subnet span multiple availability zones? Yes, a subnet can span multiple availability zones within the same Azure region, allowing for zonal distribution and high availability of resources. 30. What tools can be used to troubleshoot network connectivity issues in Azure? Azure Network Watcher tools like Connection Troubleshoot, IP Flow Verify, NSG Flow Logs, Packet Capture, and network topology can be used for diagnostics. 31. What is a subnet in Azure and why is it used? A subnet in Azure is a range of IP addresses within a net. It is used to divide the net into smaller segments to organize and secure resources logically. 32. What is force tunneling in Azure networking? Force tunneling is used to direct outbound internet traffic from Azure resources back through on-premises infrastructure, often for compliance or inspection via VPN or ExpressRoute. 33. How does Azure handle overlapping IP address spaces in peered nets? Azure does not allow net peering if the address spaces of the two nets overlap. You must use non-overlapping CIDR blocks to establish a successful peering connection. 34. What is the difference between basic and standard SKU for public IP in Azure? Basic public IPs are region-specific and don't support availability zones or advanced features. Standard SKU provides better resiliency, is zone redundant, and is required for some services like Azure Firewall and Application Gateway. 35. What is a virtual network tap in Azure? Virtual network tap allows you to continuously mirror traffic from a virtual network to a packet collector or analytics tool for monitoring and diagnostics. 36. What is the purpose of Azure DDoS protection? Azure DDoS protection provides automatic network traffic monitoring and mitigation against distributed denial of service (DDoS) attacks to protect Azure applications and services. 37. Can Azure Load Balancer be used with both inbound and outbound traffic? Yes, Azure Load Balancer supports both inbound traffic, distributing it to backend pools, and outbound SNART, source network address translation, for outbound connections from the backend pool. 38. What is the role of a backend pool in Azure Load Balancer? A backend pool is a group of virtual machines or instances that receive incoming traffic from the Azure Load Balancer for load distribution. 39. How do you implement high availability for network traffic in Azure? High availability can be achieved using Azure Load Balancer, availability zones, zone redundant gateways, Azure Firewall, and redundant net peering across zones or regions. 40. How do you secure traffic between nets using Azure Firewall? Deploy Azure Firewall in a central hub net and use route tables, UDRs, in spoke nets to direct internet traffic through the firewall for inspection and control. 41. What is the role of a probe in Azure Load Balancer? A probe in Azure Load Balancer checks the health of backend pool instances. If a probe fails, the load balancer stops sending traffic to that instance until it becomes healthy again. 42. How does Azure handle outbound internet connectivity for VMs in the net? Azure provides default outbound access using a system-managed IP if no public IP, load balancer, or NAT gateway is associated. For production, it's recommended to use NAT gateway for control and scalability. 43. What is a NAT gateway in Azure and when should you use it? A NAT gateway provides outbound internet connectivity for virtual machines in a subnet while keeping them private. It's used to scale and secure outbound traffic. 44. Can you connect a net to multiple on-premises networks? How? Yes, by configuring multiple site-to-site VPNs or using Azure Virtual WAN. A single net can connect to multiple on-premises networks for hybrid connectivity. 45. What are the differences between Azure VPN Gateway SKUs? SKUs like Basic, VPN GW15, and High Performance vary in terms of throughput, number of connections, SLA, and features like zone redundancy. Higher SKUs support more advanced features and performance. 46. How do you isolate workloads in Azure using networking? Workloads can be isolated using nets, subnets, NSGs, ASGs, and by segmenting networks through hub and spoke architectures or using private endpoints and firewalls. 47. What is IP Flow Verify in Azure Network Watcher? IP Flow Verify checks if traffic is allowed or denied to / from a VM based on NSG rules, helping to troubleshoot connectivity issues quickly. 48. What is a peering status of initiated innet peering? Initiated means one side of the peering connection has been created, but the other side hasn't accepted it yet. peering is only active once both ends are configured. 49. What happens when you disable BGP on Azure VPN Gateway? Disabling BGP stops dynamic route exchange between your on-premises network and Azure. You'll need to configure static routes manually for communication. 50. How do you enable custom DNS for a net? You can configure custom DNS by editing the DNS server settings in the net configuration, allowing Azure resources to resolve names using your specified DNS servers. 51. What is the difference between Azure Private Link and Service Endpoint? Private Link maps an Azure service to a private IP in your net, providing true private access. Service endpoints allow secure access over the Azure backbone but still expose the public endpoint. 52. What is the purpose of Azure ExpressRoute? Azure ExpressRoute enables a private, dedicated connection between your on-premises infrastructure and Microsoft Azure, bypassing the public internet for enhanced reliability and security. 53. Can you use NSG with Azure Application Gateway? Yes, you can associate NSGs with subnets used by Application Gateway, but you must allow required ports, for example, 65503 to 65534 for backend help, for it to function properly. 54. What are UDRs and why are they important in Azure networking? User-defined routes, UDRs, allow you to override Azure's default system routing by specifying custom next hops for traffic from subnets, commonly used with NVA or Azure Firewall. 55. How can you implement segmentation between workloads in the same net? Segmentation can be achieved using subnets combined with NSGs, ASGs, and route tables to control traffic between workloads. 56. What are NSG rule priorities and how do they work? NSG rules have a priority from 100 to 4096, where a lower number means higher priority. Rules are evaluated in order, and the first match determines the outcome, allow or deny. 57. What is the maximum number of nets you can peer in Azure? As of now, a single net can be peered with up to 500 nets in the same region and 500 globally using global net peering. 58. What is an Azure Virtual WAN and how is it different from net peering? Azure Virtual WAN is a networking service that provides optimized and automated branch-to-branch connectivity via Azure. Unlike net peering, it supports large-scale network management with built-in routing and security features. 59. What is a custom probe in Azure Load Balancer? A custom probe allows you to configure the protocol, HTTP/TCP, port, and path to monitor the health of backend services more accurately than the default TCP probe. 60. What is the significance of the 168.63.129.16 IP address in Azure? This is a special, well-known virtual IP address used by Azure for platform services like DNS, DHCP, and health monitoring within the Azure infrastructure.